Most women don't actually fall for the man standing in front of them. They fall for who he could become. And what's interesting is, most of the time, they know it. Deep down, they know exactly what's happening. They know he's inconsistent. They know he disappears. They know he says one thing and does another. They know they're carrying most of the emotional weight. But somehow, they still stay emotionally attached. Not because of who he is, but because of who they believe he might become. And that's where things get complicated. Because potential is one of the most seductive things in dating. Not chemistry, not attraction, potential. Potential can keep you attached far longer than reality ever could. Because reality has evidence, potential has imagination, and imagination can be very convincing, especially when you're emotionally invested. Maybe you've met someone who had moments. Those moments where he seemed caring, thoughtful, attentive. The version of him that made you think, there he is. The version that made you believe everything was finally about to fall into place. Then a week later, he's distant again. Confusing again. Unavailable again. But your brain keeps returning to those moments. Not because they happened often, but because they felt meaningful. And this is where a lot of women accidentally trap themselves. They start dating the highlights instead of the pattern. You know what's scary? A lot of relationships never become what they could be because one person spends years ignoring what they already are. And the longer you invest, the harder it becomes to let go. Because now you're not only attached to the person, you're attached to the future you imagined with them. The version of the relationship that never actually existed. The conversations you thought you'd eventually have. The commitment you thought would eventually come. The effort you thought would eventually appear. The emotional maturity you kept hoping would arrive. And every time you consider walking away, your mind whispers, but what if next month is different? But what if he's finally ready? But what if he's about to change? Suddenly you're not evaluating reality anymore. You're negotiating with possibility. What's interesting about emotionally unavailable people is they often give just enough. Just enough attention, just enough affection, just enough hope, not enough consistency to build something healthy, but enough to keep the attachment alive. It's like getting tiny rewards at random intervals. You never know when they'll happen, which makes you crave them even more. And before you realize it, you're not enjoying the relationship. You're anticipating it. You're constantly waiting for it to become what you imagined. Waiting for him to become who you think he could be. Waiting for things to finally make sense. And months pass. Sometimes years. Meanwhile, the evidence never changes. His actions stay the same. The pattern stays the same. The excuses stay the same. Only the hope changes. The hope gets bigger. The reality stays exactly where it is. And that's why some women struggle so much to leave. Because leaving doesn't feel like losing a person. It feels like losing a dream. The dream hurts more. The dream is harder to release. Because a real person has flaws. A fantasy doesn't. A fantasy can become anything. A fantasy can promise everything. A fantasy never has to prove itself. Reality does. The older I get, the more I realize something. Potential is not a personality trait. Potential is not a commitment. Potential is not effort. Potential doesn't build relationships. Actions do. Consistency does. Character does. And one of the hardest lessons in dating is accepting that someone's potential belongs to them. Not you. You cannot love somebody into becoming who they could be. You cannot sacrifice enough to make them emotionally available. You cannot remain patient enough to force growth. Growth is a decision people make for themselves. And when they don't make it, there's nothing you can do except accept what is. Not what could be, what is. Because acceptance is where clarity begins. The women who seem the strongest aren't the women who never get attached. They're the women who stop arguing with reality. They stop trying to turn mixed signals into certainty. They stop turning breadcrumbs into promises. They stop turning potential into commitment. And they start asking a different question. Not, who could he become? But, who is he right now? That question changes everything. Because suddenly you're looking at facts instead of fantasies. Patterns instead of promises. Actions instead of words. And that's usually when the answer becomes obvious. The truth is, most people tell you who they are very early. Not with speeches, not with explanations, but with patterns. The question is whether you're willing to believe them, or whether you're still in love with the version of them that only exists in your imagination. Because sometimes closure isn't realizing he never loved you. Sometimes closure is realizing you spent years loving his potential more than his reality. And once you see that, you stop mourning the relationship. You start reclaiming yourself. Because the future you imagined with him? You can still have that future. Just not necessarily with him. And that changes everything.